Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Today's guest is Emily Jaenson, the co-founder of the Assist Group, where she is helping companies with marketing, productivity, and more. Emily is also the host of the Leadership is Female podcast, and she has been the general manager for Reno Aces Baseball Club, a role which at the time she was the first woman to hold in over 20 years. Get ready to learn about her TEDx talk, 6 Behaviors to Increase Your Confidence, how it is like working in a male-dominated industry, the top 3 hurdles for women in sports, her biggest regret from college, and much more. Emily Jaenson, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me, Marcus. Happy to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really good. We were just chatting about Monday morning in Reno, Nevada, and it is the best time of year entering into fall. So weather's beautiful and nothing to complain about. So all good.
That's great to hear. And as I told you, we are heading in Sweden. The fall is not the best time of year, but we make do. So you are a sports executive, marketeer, public speaker. You have your own podcast, Leadership is Female, and more. So how were you introduced to the sports industry?
Sure. So like many people who work in sports, I played sports as a child, played everything. I had 2 brothers who really rooted the competitiveness inside of me. I think we were competing from the time we could know what competing was, whether it was playing basketball in the driveway or running bases in the front yard or sprinting to see who was the fastest. I think that competition started as a child. I played soccer was my sport of choice, and I played for a little bit in college. And I was always interested in what the sports industry might have to offer. And I thought the only way to get there was through medicine. So I actually started college as with the intention to be a physical therapist. And I was a few weeks into biology and chemistry when I realized this is not how my brain works. I am much more creative and analytical. And what I found out was business minded rather than dedicated to the study of science. So I dropped a lot of classes. I still remained a full-time student and then had to pivot and sort of understand like how I could make that happen. And that's where I found advertising. So I studied advertising through university and was offered a full-time job with benefits and a salary at an advertising agency in Chicago. And I turned it down to take an internship with the Chicago Bulls in the NBA. And I worked there for the entirety of the internship, almost 10 months, finished first in group sales. And one thing I like to note is that this internship class had 12 new college grads jockeying for a full-time position in the organization. And we all worked really hard. And at the end of the term, they hired 2 people. And even though I finished first in group sales, I was not one of them. And this was my first experience dealing with what I was considering a failure in my career. I didn't win the spot. And as somebody who's a competitive person, that felt pretty tough for me. But I think that our careers sort of unfold for us in the right way. And I was able to land a position with a really big nonprofit in Chicago, where at 22 years old, I was meeting with executives, pitching them partnerships, pitching them events, sort of really stepping beyond the scope of what I might have thought I was capable of at 22 years old. And that helped me grow really quickly. So that was my start in the sports industry and why I got into it. And, years later, I wound up in Reno, and the only job that the Reno Aces, which is the AAA affiliate of the Arizona Diamondbacks, the only job they had available was an account executive role in corporate partnerships. And by that time, I had about 8 years experience, selling and doing deals. And I thought, this is like a little bit low of a title, but they don't know me from the next person. So I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to take the job and I'm going to earn the position that I think that I deserve. So 2 years later, I was promoted to vice president of corporate partnerships with the team and led them to reach many revenue goals. Left the team because I got married and my husband had an opportunity in Houston. When I landed in Houston, again, the career sort of helped me along the way get the next opportunity. I worked for Harris County Houston Sports Authority as a consultant and was able to be their sales director for a lot of major events in a huge city, which was another set of experiences for me to sort of add to my tool belt. And 2 years later, the Aces called and asked me to come back to be the general manager, which was amazing because taking that title made me the first female GM in AAA baseball in almost 20 years. So I said, yes, we moved back to Reno, and I had that title for almost 4 years when I left at the beginning of the year to pursue some other endeavors. So that's sort of the short version of a long, 16 years in this industry.
That's fantastic. What a career. And it's not over yet.
No, it's not. Some days I feel like I'm just getting started.
That's fantastic. Jumping back to your internship, what made you take the internship with Chicago Bulls, as you said, instead of the full-time job?
So I took it because it was my chance. I thought I only get, one shot to make this happen. And this is my opportunity to make it work. And I talked to my parents about it. I had to ask them for continued financial support to take the internship because I had to live in the city. Internships don't pay a lot of money. And I was really fortunate to have them be able to help supplement my income so I could live in the city and fulfill my dream. And it was sort of this place where taking the ad agency job was one path, taking the Bulls job was another. And I thought, where am I going to have regrets if I don't take the agency job or if I don't take the chance to work in sports? And I knew I would regret it if I didn't take the chance to work in sports. I'd probably be telling people today, oh, I had this chance to take an internship with the Bulls and I turned it down. And, here I am today. So I really wanted to bet on myself, and the Bulls was the way to go.
And it paid off.
It did. It did.
And then moving on to Aces, as you mentioned, and you took a lower position, and then you were in charge of corporate sponsorships, and then ended up as the general manager, as you said, also the first in 20 years. And I think at that time you were one out of 3 maybe executives in the league. Can I be correct?
Yeah, I think I don't remember the exact statistic. There were either 3. Well, there were 6 female general managers in minor league baseball in totality. I was the only in AAA, which is the highest level of affiliation. But not too long later, I think it was within 2 years, there was another female GM named, and then another. So as I was leaving the Aces, there were 4 female GMs in AAA baseball, and that's only 30 teams in the country. Or, if you expand, it's really the world. There's only 30 teams available for a GM spot, and 4 of them were held by women. So it was pretty cool.
Do you think that the job that you did encouraged more women, or maybe opened, the door for, or opened the eyes to other teams to, believe in female GMs as well?
I don't know if I'll take credit for it, but I hope so indirectly. And that was one of the really key moments during my time as GM was baseball winter meetings of 2018 in Las Vegas, where all the teams convene, and it's executives from, at the time, there were 160 minor league baseball teams. Major League Baseball teams are also attending these meetings. And there's an event called Women in Baseball, and then Women in Baseball Leadership. And they had asked me to be part of a panel at that event and asked a bunch of questions about my experience. How did I get there? And it was really fun to take the stage and speak to a group of almost 300 women, which was also incredible to see that amount of women who work in the sport convening in one space. And after I left the stage, there was a line that sort of formed to speak with all the speakers and all the panelists to get to know the women better. And one woman after another told me, I didn't know that I could have that job until I saw you. And that was the huge eye opener for me. There's a quote by Marian Wright Edelman. She says, "You can't be what you can't see." And so I thought, okay, this is a chance for me to set an example and to speak up. I wanted to, number one goal was to do great work for the organization, because if I didn't, then it would all be for nothing. But I thought I also owed it to the community to make myself visible so that people could know and see and understand that they could have those roles too. Not just women to go after those jobs, but also the men in the room to see that I was competent, confident, and knowledgeable to own that position.
How is it to work as a woman in a male-dominated field, and especially on an executive positions as you had?
Yeah, for me, I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, I grew up with two brothers and I played sports on boys teams a few times. And, mostly the men that have been around me in my career have been really supportive. They've given me the promotions, they've mentored me and taught me. So for me, it was just par for the course. Like I tried not to focus on the fact that I was the only woman in the room. I focused on the knowledge that I brought to the table and the experience and the smart questions that I could ask. And sometimes being a new voice in the room, male or female, is hard. But for me, I thought of it as an advantage. If these individuals, I pay respect to all the experience that they have, but when there's a new person at the table, they can often bring a new perspective and new ideas that if you've been there for a long time, you might not see because you're so used to marching in one direction. So I really focused on my strengths and what I could bring to the group and to executive leadership versus the fact that I was the girl.
Yeah. Currently, you are the co-founder of the Assist Group. Is that right?
Yeah. So I run the Assist Group, and I also have a podcast, Leadership is Female, where we just celebrated 100 episodes. But in my work, I do consulting. So I'm working with brands, teams, and nonprofits in 3 different segments, either corporate partnerships, the sponsorship arena, helping them to take sort of that 30,000 foot view and say, do I have the systems set up to be successful in the long term? Whether that's training, your internal documents, you're tracking your evaluations of how you are looking at your products. Are your rates correct? Just that overall evaluation that sometimes organizations are running so quickly, you don't have the time to step back and say, do I have the right systems in place? You're leading that day-to-day sales. So that was something that I had brought in previous career experiences that really helped my teams accelerate our revenue generation. So I want to bring that to others. The second area is strategic marketing. Again, that is something that I made big impacts in the organizations I worked for previously, is looking at a strategic marketing plan that asks one question. The first one is why, and the second is show me the data. Again, I think when we are working diligently, sometimes we have like a focus group of one or a mindset that's very fixed on the way things were or the way you project things should be. And you might not, again, zoom out to take that 30,000 foot view, look at the data, ask yourself why you're doing things. and then formulate a strategic marketing plan that fits your business today and for the next couple of years. And then sort of the final area is in the ticketing side. And that's where a lot of my partners come in to help. I got some great women that work with me, one of whom is Samantha Hicks. She was the Chief Revenue Officer for the Reno Aces. And she's an expert in ticketing and data and analysis and goal setting. And again, those are areas that sometimes you just need the assist, which is where the group name came from is, hey, I need a little bit of help. I need an outside counsel. And so throughout these 3 units, we also focus a lot on the leadership skills that are necessary to lead partnerships, marketing, or ticketing, and help sort of formulate the operation around that as well, including meetings, which is where I think a lot of people struggle, is having effective meetings with their teams and with the individuals. So that's where the Assist group formed. And we've got a lot of great new business coming in this fall and in Q1. So we're excited to be able to help a broader group of organizations succeed.
I'm happy to hear. Is this focused on the sports industry, I assume?
So sports, brands, and nonprofits. So it's a little bit of everything, but they have those common denominators of partnerships, of marketing, and of some type of sales. So it's a brand. It might not be tickets. It might be product, but you can look at those principles very similarly.
Regarding meetings, is the biggest issue that there are too many meetings?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are laughing hearing that question. I think there's too many meetings, and I think the meetings are ineffective. And I think that there's just a lot of talking, not a lot of takeaway, and not a lot of tracking. So that was something that a symptom or a long-lasting effect I think we're still dealing with from the pandemic, when we went virtual without a lot of training on how to do a virtual business, a virtual management style. And there's so many different programs out there that we can be using to manage our employees, manage the outcomes of those meetings, direct the meetings. If you notice, if somebody puts a 30-minute meeting on your calendar, you generally take up exactly 30 minutes. If that person would have put an hour meeting on your calendar, you probably would have taken up exactly 60 minutes. So I think we also need to evaluate how much time is necessary. What are we looking to accomplish? Who is part of the meeting? If you're an executive or a manager who's running a meeting and you finish a meeting and there are people that were part of the meeting that never spoke, was that a meeting or was that a presentation? Ask yourself these questions, and also, think about how you're tracking the outcomes and holding people accountable for what was said and what was decided. So there's a lot of different pathways that I use to help manage my team to become more effective and also function without having to either knock on my door at the office constantly or send me an email or send me a message multiple times during the day, wondering what direction to go next. If I was getting too many messages from somebody asking what's next, I knew that there was a malfunction in my management style because there wasn't clear direction on the project.
That's so interesting, because I've also felt that it's too many meetings. And as you say, that maybe you have sat in a 1-hour meeting and you don't feel any different afterwards.
Yeah. And the other topic, just real quick, based on what you just said, you sat in a meeting and you thought, oh gosh, why was I here? Meetings are expensive. Think about your payroll and the number of employees that work for you and the people that you're convening together for 1 hour a person, the payroll associated with each person and the outcomes expected from each person. It's an expensive meeting. Are you using that hour effectively? And I think if you can think about it with that mindset, you might be a little bit more cognizant about how many meetings you're setting and who's attending and what outcomes are expected.
This episode is sponsored by InSport Education, the online business school for sport. They offer a range of different courses, for example, Foundations of Sport Business, Private Equity in Sport, and much, much more. As a listener to this podcast, you get 10% off all of their courses using the code SportsManagementPodcast10. Click the link in the description below and sign up today. Let's talk about your podcast. You mentioned it. So first of all, congratulations on 100 episodes.
Thank you.
I haven't listened to them all, but I have listened to quite a few. It's called Leadership is Female podcast. So how come you started your own podcast?
So this podcast was born during the pandemic, and the catalyst for getting this started was during the year of 2020, I had a lot of speaking engagements booked, whether it was at a sports conference or just locally to promote the Reno Aces at the time, or speaking to a women in leadership group for any number of industries. And of course, they were all canceled. Some moved to Zoom, but a lot of events we just wiped off the calendar. And I had some time for reflection. And I thought, it's one thing when I'm going in and promoting the Aces, like that's necessary for me to be behind the podium. But there are so many women out there who are doing incredible things in this industry, in the sports industry. And I want to help share their voices too. I don't want to continue to tell my story over and over again. And I wanted to share the microphone. And a great way to do that was through the interview format of a podcast. So I took a digital podcasting course over the summer to learn about podcasting and marketing and putting out your messages. I'm a very curious and voracious learner. So if I'm going to step into anything, I want to do the research around it to make sure that, we get a running start. And I launched the podcast in August and started reaching out to my network and saying, hey, I started this podcast, Leadership is Female. The goal is to interview women in sports leadership so that we can lead her forward. It goes back to that original quote, you can't be what you can't see. So what if I collected all these interviews for women succeeding in this industry with all different types of executive level titles? What impact could that have over time? If you heard from women all over the country who were in roles that you might seek to achieve one day in your career, or you're a leader who might not have a great network of women to bounce ideas off of or learn from, like it serves two purposes. Senior women who want to continue to hear new ideas, level up, hear from their peers, and be encouraged. And then also for a younger set of women who want to see what it is they could achieve one day, or sort of get the playbook. Like we talk about hurdles that have been overcome, mistakes that have been made, and what you learned. And if you listen and tune into this podcast, these women are very vulnerable in sharing the hurdles that they have overcome in their career, their success moments, their insights. It's like a cheat guide to getting to the next level. And I have about 25% of a male audience as well. And I always laugh and say, like, these are the smart guys. Like they're listening and understanding like a different level and unlocking a different level of what they can do to be the best employee, best executive, best business owner by hearing these stories from successful just people. So that's where the podcast was born. And it's been just an incredible journey over the last 2 years to get to expand my thoughts and horizons and circles, personally interviewing these people, and then also hearing from the listeners and the impact that the stories and interviews have had on their lives and careers.
What have been some hurdles that the guests have shared with you?
So, a lot of the hurdles we talk about are pretty common themes. I would say one is confidence or finding your voice. And when each woman sort of embodied their confidence, found their voice, understood who they were and what they were going after, that was like the tipping point in their career, because they learned how to speak up for themselves, communicate their ideas effectively, really show that they earn their seat at the table and then become a better leader through that example. I would say another one was like what we discussed earlier. Sometimes these women were the only women in the room, and understanding how to use that or how to overcome that circumstance and what that meant to them as an individual. And sort of each tip around that space has been unique. And then I would say the third most common is probably, women are the person who bear the children. So it's it can be a big hurdle. And we always laugh and say, we don't want to call our children hurdles, but it's certainly a hurdle in our career, having a child and figuring out like what's next when you have this tiny human to take care of, and how do you navigate that time in your life, and then how do you define what you want after you become a mother. And I think it's different for everybody, but there's been all sorts of conversations around maternity leaves and return to work and defining your career after having children. And so those have been really amazing conversations that I really don't think a lot of people are talking about publicly. So I've really enjoyed digging into that topic with my guests, so that even if you're really young in your career and you're not thinking about having kids for 10 years, it can still plant the seeds of potentially what you can do when that time comes. Or for, people who are in that time in their life right now, it gives lots of great examples of how to navigate that tricky time in your life. That's also like the biggest blessing and the most amazing time in your life. So those have been really incredible conversations, and probably the top three most popular hurdles.
I assume with being a mom and a career woman also, it really matters in which company you are, how supportive they are with the process as well.
It does. It absolutely does. And I'm happy that a lot of companies are progressing in this space, but we're still not there yet in America. The minimum time for maternity leave right now in some companies, or maximum time, is 6 or 8 weeks, which is a very, very small amount of time for a mother to take care of an infant child and then also return to work after sometimes a major surgery, or that's a big thing to happen to your body, and then return to work in such a small amount of time when you still have a teeny tiny human who's dependent on you. So we have a lot of work to do in that space. And also, in America, many maternity leaves are unpaid. So that's a huge space to navigate as well. You might receive a certain percentage of your salary through an insurance premium for maybe 6 weeks of your maternity leave. And then if you decide to take 12 weeks off, you're going for another 6 weeks with no pay. And depending on the circumstances of your family, that may or may not be doable. But can you start childcare when the baby is 6 weeks old? And then that's an added expense. So there's a lot to navigate. And I think there's a long way to go for us to do better as a country and as organizations to support working moms.
Yeah. You took me by surprise there. I was sure you were going to say months when you said 6 to 8. That's why I didn't know that it was that short. In Sweden, we have a different situations here. So I don't know exactly, but I think it's around a year at least.
Yeah, I know. And I saw the shock on your face, and it is shocking. And I know that that's the way for a lot of countries in Europe and Canada. You have a year, and there's a whole subset industry in Canada for temp workers who employ for a year while a woman is out on maternity leave taking care of her baby. And so it's we have got a long way to go.
You recently spoke at the TEDx Reno on the topic 6 behaviors to increase your confidence.
Yeah.
I listened to it the other day. It's 10 great minutes that I encourage everyone to listen to. But how come that you decided on this topic and to speak at TEDx?
Yeah. So first, I'll talk about why I did TEDx. So I'm a big goal setter, and I think goals need to be big and audacious and be things that scare you so you can grow. And speaking on the TEDx stage with no notes, no PowerPoint, complete memorization of the speech was something beyond what I'd ever done. Every speech I'd given, I had notes and a PowerPoint, or I was talking on a topic that I had 20 or 30 minutes to discuss, maybe something about my career or my circumstances. And it was easy. But to deliver a sort of a research-based, very formulated, pointed talk on the TEDx stage in Reno, which, by the way, the stage and the lighting and the sound and the AV was the same that was used at the Super Bowl the year prior. So this is a legit event. And so first I had to get accepted. So I submitted a proposal, and there's a few hundred people who submit proposals to talk on stage. They only pick 20. And I was chosen. And then you defend your topic, and then you go through this series of 3 different revisions where you're giving your talk in front of a committee, and they provide all this feedback. And so the whole thing is like a huge growth experience and challenge to even get to the stage. And so that was one of the main reasons I did it. The other reason was the opportunity to potentially share the key learnings from the Leadership is Female podcast to a larger, more expansive audience was very enticing for me. And I think as a podcast host, I owe it to my guests to try to expand their message and the time that they take to sit with me and share their voice. I owe it to them to try to reach a larger audience. So that was sort of the second reason why I did TEDx, was the hope that, okay, if I can write a good enough talk, then more people can hear about the podcast, can hear about the lessons that these women have taught. And then also more people are exposed to this awesome learning opportunity that the women provide on Leadership is Female. So that's why I did it. And the topic came from, as you discussed, or asked me what were the biggest hurdles women have encountered. And the first one was the confidence piece, and earning and growing that confident behavior in order for them to take their seat at the table, to be at the top and to really show up every day with excellence. Like, how do you do that? And as I started to dig into it more, I had all these amazing examples from the podcast on how the behaviors women did in order to increase their confidence. And then also I uncovered this body of research around the fact that behaviors can change attitudes. So there was this set of research that existed that was proving like why these women were able to do this. And so I pulled the research with the examples and put that together in the talk. And after amazing revisions with the help of the committee, was able to formulate sort of these 6 topics, these 6 ways in order to increase your confidence that are pretty simple little reminders that you can think of, like, oh, I really don't want to do this, but I need to do this because either it's part of my job or I want to be a person who shows up in this way. Okay, here's like a quick hitter piece of advice that I can just implement and then go. And, the one I'm thinking of is, and you guys will have to listen to the talk, but the countdown, the 3, 2, 1, go. Every time that I have not wanted to have a conversation with somebody, every time that I have not wanted to engage in conflict, first thing I thought was like, who am I and who do I want to become? How does that person behave? And all right, if I'm in this leadership position, like I can't be standing in the corner, like not having difficult conversations. So I would literally count myself in, just the same way that the countdown clock happens when you start a game, or the countdown clock happens to take that final shot, you can count yourself in. So I would literally say in my head, 3, 2, 1, go. And then start walking towards that conversation or start saying the things that I really didn't want to say. And once you start going, the momentum will keep you moving forward. So that's sort of how the talk adopted. And I'm just thrilled by how many views it's had. I just got a statistic last week that it was the number 2 talk in the world for those talks released in August. And there were 927 TEDx talks released in August, and mine was number 2. So it was pretty incredible.
That's amazing. I will include the link, YouTube link in the show notes also if someone wants to check it out.
Thanks.
Yeah, on that topic, what would be your best advice for women who wants to break into the sports industry?
Yeah, I think my best advice is to start. There's so many opportunities out there, and to really broaden your perspective on what it means to start in the sports industry. You're not going to start as a vice president or a manager, like you got to start somewhere, and that can be working in guest services for a pro team in your area. Or if you're in college, get involved in university athletics. When people ask me, was there an opportunity that you missed, or what's one regret you had for your career? That would be my regret. I went to University of Illinois. I went to a Big Ten school, and I did not get involved in college athletics. It was right under my nose, but I couldn't see that opportunity. So for those who are still in school, look into that. Number 1, it's right there. You can walk to work. And then for those who are, in big cities, if you can't get into the front office, if you can't find a job or an internship in the front office, work in guest services. You will be noticed. If you are young and wearing that guest services shirt, showing up, giving your best every day, people and executives in that organization will take notice of you and your work ethic. And I can promise you'll get an opportunity.
That's great. We talked about it very early on the episode about the bumps on the road in your career. Is there any other that you would like to share?
Definitely the university one was a one that, like, looking back, I just think, oh, Emily, if I could just talk to that, 18-year-old girl and tell her to walk past the gym, just another block to the athletics office and look there. I was really, I think, focused at the time on would I still continue to play soccer and what did that look like? I was looking more at the field than behind the scenes. But I would love to be on my shoulder in college and just whisper in my ear, like, go and do that. And as far as another regret, I mean, not really. My career has been nonlinear, I would say, but somehow I've been able to tell the story of how one opportunity led to another and how each stop along the way has made me a better leader, a better executive. I think because of the diverse set of experiences I have, I bring a more global perspective to the table as a leader. So while some people might look and say, you should have stayed with a team and been there for 16 years. I wouldn't trade my career and the experiences I had for anything. And I think you just have to look at your own path and own it as your own and just make the next best decision that feels the best for you when you're ready to make your career move.
So that was a bump and an advice.
Yes, it was.
That's great. Is there something that I haven't asked you yet that you want to bring up?
We talked a lot about all of it, sports experience, the podcast, TEDx, the new company. It's been quite the ride. And as I stated, I feel like, I'm not even close to finished yet. So I'm excited for what's next and who I'll get to work with. And also just continue to elevate women in leadership and also elevate the the men, the allies who are supporting a diverse front office in this industry.
I'm excited to continue to follow your career journey. But before I let you go, the last question that I ask everyone is, if you could choose the next guest on this podcast, who do you think that I should talk to?
Oh, that's a tough one. There are so many amazing women. And the one who's really top of mind right now, I would say Ariel Moyal of Moyal Enterprises. She is incredible. She was guest number 101 on the Leadership is Female podcast. Her episode came out last week, and she focuses on elevating brands through athlete partnerships. And she launched her company, Moyal Enterprises, in the beginning of the year, and has an enormous client roster already of just incredible names and brands that she represents. She's amazing. So I would say her. She's very top of mind. But I have a Rolodex of amazing women in my head who have just been incredible beacons of light to lead the industry.
Yeah, I'm sure. And if I go through all of your episodes, I can find probably all of them there would be great guests.
Yeah. And you know what, who else I would say? Laura Dixon, who leads the Pro Sports Assembly. It's definitely somebody you should look into hosting and also promoting Pro Sports Assembly, which is a collection of professionals and teams. Right now, I think only in the United States, but they're bringing professional development and research to this industry that we haven't seen, like sort of a one body that has focused on leadership and growth and really who's involved in the industry and how much are they being paid. And they're really great. So I would also say Laura Dixon. I can never just do one. If you ask me for one, the answer is
you can say as many as you want. I appreciate all the input on great guests.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you.
Emily Jaenson, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Marcus. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.